Distinguished panelists, guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon to all of you. Warm welcome. I'm Neng from the Center for Liveable Cities. I'll be your MC and moderator for this afternoon. So the Center for Liveable Cities, or CLC, was established by the Ministry of National Development and the Ministry of the Environment and Water Resources back in 2008, and its purpose is to distill, create, and share knowledge on livable and sustainable cities. The CLC Lecture series is one of the platforms through which urban thought leaders share their insights and experiences, best practices with the community. And apart from lectures, CLC prepares case studies on urban development, or Singapore's urban development, and we call these urban system studies. Today, we'll be launching our latest urban system study entitled Working with Markets, Harnessing Market Forces and Private Sector for Development. So before we begin today's event and lecture, I want to invite Dr. Limin He, Director, Center for Livable Cities, to give the opening remarks for today's event. Dr. He, please.
Today, almost every city and country in the world is convinced of the need to foster a conducive economic environment, encourage market competition, attract foreign investments, and enhance the ease of doing business. Singapore has done well in this regard. It is ranked number 2 out of 190 economies in the World Bank's latest Doing Business report. But while we are all convinced of the need for partnership between private and public sectors, there are many approaches and methods for doing so. Put simply, different countries work with markets in different ways, and these strategies change and evolve over time. Economic development is closely linked with both livability and the built environment. In the early decades, the government built up the essential conditions for economic development. Business and industrial parks, key infrastructure like ports and airports, and quality institutions like the rule of law, a sound education system, and proactive trade and investment promotion agencies. In turn, public agencies leveraged on the private sector's growing innovative, technical, and financial capabilities to provide services or solutions which the government alone could not. Economic growth provided jobs and enhanced Singaporeans' quality of life and standard of living. Most recently, urban rejuvenation and planning have supported and encouraged growth in key sectors of the future economy. The Marina Bay Financial Centre, One North Creative Cluster, Jurong Lake District, Innovation District, and Punggol Creative Cluster provide world-class facilities and space for businesses and investors. Writing in 2001, the head of Singapore Civil Service, Mr. Lim Siong Guan, co-authored a paper with Harvard Kennedy School lecturer John Thomas on how markets were used to improve governance in Singapore. They concluded that, open quote, what is absolutely key to understanding Singapore's success in applying market systems to public problems is the centrality of the state in assessing, controlling, and regulating the market. The hallmark of Singapore's use of the market has been strong government control and oversight, close quote. The short paragraph captures some of the many roles of policymakers in engaging the market, as well as the balance between the private and public sectors, which has not remained constant but shifted in the decades since. Likewise, the phrase working with markets captures the fine balance of successful public-private collaboration. It is a partnership, and as with all partnerships, there are challenges, setbacks, and successes. Yet there's no other way. Markets need government, and governments need market. I trust that today's panel discussion will explore various interesting perspectives and experiences of how the Singapore government has worked with the market in areas such as land sales, resource pricing, economic management and policy, government-linked corporations, and private-public partnerships. The USS publication, Working with Markets, Harnessing Market Forces and Private Sector for Development, will also be launched after the panel discussion. I would like to congratulate all those who have contributed to this book, including all 4 of our panelists today, and to thank the many people from both the private and public sectors who have contributed their time, wisdom, and assistance. They have shared their stories and experiences with us generously, and without them, this book would not have been possible. I look forward to a good and useful panel sharing and discussion. Thank you.
So before we begin the lecture, I just want to introduce our 4 panelists briefly. They will be sitting in the audience for the duration of the speaking, but then they will come up in front later on. So all of our 4 panelists have got vast experience in the field of working with markets. We're very pleased to have them with us today. And they have also contributed significantly to our USS, so a big thank you to all of you. So our first speaker for today is Mr. Choy Pong. He's former senior advisor in the Urban Redevelopment Authority and a group director in URA who was responsible for the planning and implementation of the government land sales program for more than 20 years. So he also introduced the auction method and the reserve list system, oversaw the sale of the business and financial center site, and was involved in the sale of the integrated resort site at Marina Bay. Now, our second speaker is Ms. Lau Sin Leng, who is former senior advisor and executive chairman of Sembcorp Development and current chairman of the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts. So Ms. Lau started her career in the Government Administrative Service in Singapore and held key positions in various ministries, including trade and industry, finance, and education. She later joined Singapore Power and Sembcorp Industries before serving as executive chairman and senior advisor of Sembcorp Development. Now, our third speaker is Lau Ming, who is senior advisor of MOH Holdings and also a veteran of the Housing and Development Board, the HDB. Lau is an adjunct professor at the Nanyang Technological University and board member of National Health Group. And so he's also a member of the panel of experts of the CLC. Now, our last speaker, Professor Yong, is Celia Mo Chair Professor of Economics at SMU and also Vice Provost at SMU. She has researched and published widely on housing issues, transport, and also public-private partnerships. So we'll start off the session today with short remarks from each of our panelists, followed by a panel discussion, and then we'll open for questions and comments from the audience. So kindly please hold your questions until the Q&A session later. Thank you. And may I please invite Mr. Choy to deliver your remarks, please? Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Government Land Sales Program, or GLS as it's commonly called, is a planned effort by the Singapore government to sell state land for private sector development. It is meant to leverage off the private sector's expertise, ideas, and financial resources to achieve important planning, development, and economic goals. The program started in 1967, so now it's already 50 years old. The GLS program has a couple of important national objectives. Firstly, it is to ensure that there is sufficient supply of properties to meet market demand and support economic growth. In Singapore, we have the distinct situation where the government owns most of the developable land. So the GLS is very important in meeting the demand for properties. But it is not just a numbers game. Sites are also selected strategically to facilitate the fiscal development of Singapore along the key planning and development objectives as laid out in the concept plan and the master plan of Singapore. Now, the data on the slide shows the importance of the GLS program to the development of Singapore. Over the past 50 years, the government has sold more than 1,600 parcels of land, totaling more than 1,200 hectares. And in terms of contribution, it has contributed to more than 50% of hotel rooms 40% of office space, almost 50% of shop space, and about 40% of private housing. Now, the Singapore economy and the property market had obviously evolved over the last 50 years. Accordingly, the Singapore development plans as well as the government land sales program had to evolve along the same lines. When the program started in 1967, and for the first 3 years, the focus was on the renewal of the city center. Examples of the sites sold then were for the development of places like the People Park Center, Marina House, and the International Plaza. And at that time, Singapore needed very badly tourism infrastructure to support the growth of the tourism industry then. So sites had to be sold for the development of hotels. We needed a lot of hotels then. So for example, in Havelock Road, sites were sold for the King's Hotel, Miramar Hotel, and the Apollo Hotel. And in the Kallang area, sites were sold for the development of recreational facilities like the Wonderland Amusement Park, the Leisure Dome, and the Kallang Theatre. Moving over to the next few years, 1970 to 1974, there were problems of constraints in supply of labor and as well as raw material. So the government land sales program slowed down, and the focus shifted to the sale of sites to develop commercial centers to house resettled businesses. And the development like Colombo Court and Serigi House came about. And after that, when things got back to normal, the city center renewal continued with the sale of sites for high-quality landmark office buildings such as the OUB Center, OCB Center, and the Gateway and Marina Square. Moving on to 1983 to the 90s, the period saw the beginning of efforts to conserve built heritage through the government land sales program. Examples were the sale of shop houses in Chinatown, Kampong Glam, Little India, and Tanjong Pagar. And there were also sale of sites for the conservation of the Raffles Hotel Extension, Clarke Quay, Chimes, and China Square. Now, the 1991 concept plan featured a key planning strategy in the decentralization of commercial centers away from the city. So through the GLS program, the focus was on the sale of sites to develop the Tampines Regional Center and the Novena Fringe Center. And in the 1990s, we also saw a sharp rise in the demand for private housing. So the government land sales program was ramped up to increase the supply of private housing. One good example is the conversion of Tanjong Rhu from shipyards to prime waterfront private housing. From the 2000 to now, the focus has shifted to the development of new growth centers. Now, the most significant of this is Marina Bay. And sites were sold there, and you now see the results in the form of the Marina Bay Financial Center, Marina Bay Sands, and the sale. This was followed by the development of other growth centers like Jurong Lake District, Paya Lebar, and Woodlands. Another focus was the rejuvenation of Orchard Road. And we saw between year 2000 to 2010, the sale of sites for the development of Ion, Orchard Central, and 313 Somerset. Now, right from the start, the government knew that for the program to be successful, it was important to gain investors' confidence. So therefore, in planning and conducting the government land sales, we make very sure of the following. Firstly, we need to understand the market well. And in understanding the market, we make sure that the focus of the program shifted with changes in the market trends and needs. But we also knew that the market is not perfect. There are market failures and various kinds of market imperfections. So in designing the government land sale processes and policies, we had to make sure that there would be controls to preempt market failures and imperfections, such as speculation and land hoarding. Next is we make sure that the program has clarity and transparency. That's why we announced the program, the details of the program, way ahead of time. We make sure that the sale conditions are very clear, and the evaluation process in award of sites is unambiguous. And finally, we make sure that the development on the sites sold by the government is hassle-free. All the services are brought to the boundaries of the sites. All the planning parameters are clearly sought out. In fact, URA went as far as to apply for outline planning permission for every site, so that when you buy a site, you already have planning approval. So this is the way we make sure that the investors have confidence in the program. And finally, we make sure that we constantly innovate to keep up with changes in the market and the market needs. One example is the introduction of the reserve list and the confirmed list. And we also introduced new methods to sell land beyond tender. We introduced auction. We introduced a two-envelope process where we evaluate concept and design together with the price. We also had fixed price tender for the two integrated resort, where we fixed the price of the land and only evaluated the proposal so that we get the best proposal for the two IRs. And one of the innovations is the master developer approach, through which we sold the Marina Bay Financial Center. Because it's such a large site, we need to help the developer mitigate the risk, allowing him to phase the development. And to do that, we introduced the option payment scheme for the sale. On the other end of the scale, we also sold subdivided landed parcel so that we can have more participation in government land sales, where smaller developers can also take part. So in conclusion, I will say that our government land sale is one of its kind in the world, mainly because of the following features. What we have is that we have a close link to planning and development objectives. The program is market-based and market-oriented in its planning and implementation. We emphasize a lot on transparency and clarity. And finally, we constantly innovate to keep up with market needs and trends. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending this. And let me just walk through very quickly. Over the past years, how did Singapore government navigate this state and market relationship? And what were the external forces that, in a way, make government adjust and modify these policies and approach? In the earlier years, 1950 to 70s, from the colonial to independence, I remember Dr. Goh Keng Swee, the former Deputy Prime Minister, were very clear that job creation and public housing were two very major priorities. So, for the job creation, EDB was established in 1961 to promote industrialization and economic growth. And HDB was also formed to undertake the public housing. At that time, government set up quite a lot of statutory board, which is quite unique in public administration as compared to other countries. As you all know, Stat Board is an autonomy agency. Although still oversight by a ministry, it has its own flexibility and freedom of action within its portfolio and areas of responsibility. It is also during that time that government established state-owned companies. And that time, state-owned companies were solely owned by government and very frequently under respective ministry. They were to provide essential services to economic and national development. For example, that time was so-called MINDEF company were under Ministry for Defense, and JTC was under Ministry of Trade and Industry, so on and so forth. Then in the 1960s to 70s, 4 economic pillars were identified as the most important to propel Singapore economic growth. First and foremost, manufacturing. Second, shipbuilding, tourism, and trade. For tourism, like STB, Singapore Tourism Promotion Board, which is a state board, was spearheading the tourist promotion. Shipbuilding, state-owned enterprise like Jurong Shipyard, Sembcorp Shipyard, Keppel Shipyard, sort of a marine, and were formed. And for trade promotion, Trade Development Board. But Trade Development Board subsequently became IE, and then now IE has been just merged with Spring. Government was very, very clear that markets need to be tapped, but they also took a very pragmatic and eclectic approach. They never failed to interfere if the market didn't deliver its result. And at the same time, government started using very competitive bidding process and price tenders for procurement of works and services. Just now you already heard Mr. Choy talk about bidding for land sales. That's a revenue bidding. Government generally award the tender who bidded the highest price for any piece of land sales. For services and work issued by, say, PUB to build power plant is really awarded to private sector who can provide the most cost competitive power plant or water treatment plant. And HDB, they issue out quite a lot of public tender for housing, public housing project. In the 1980s and 90s, there was a rethinking of the role of private sector in the economy. 1985, Singapore faced first economic recession, and there was a very high-level economic committee formed in 1986. The conclusion of the committee was mainly leaned towards market liberalization, privatization, and a mindset of perhaps the state should retreat from commercial activities. The economy at that time was viewed to be larger already. Private sector is already more developed. Then shortly after, Public Sector Divestment Committee came out with a report and identified that GLC, Government Leng Company, should be earmarked for divestment. And the rationales were, first, government to withdraw from commercial activities. Second, we want to broaden and deepen the Singapore stock market. Third, to avoid or reduce competition with the private sector. So quite a number of GLC was floated on the stock exchange. They become listed company, no longer 100% owned by government. And it was also at that time quite a lot of consolidation. A lot of company like MINDEF company, like Singapore Technology, whatever it is, no longer under respective ministry, like Ministry of Defense or Ministry of Trade Industry. They were all grouped together under Ministry for Finance and under Temasek Holding for overall assessment, control, and monitoring. So it paved a way for a broader and bigger role for the private sector. And by listing the GLC onto the stock exchange, it allowed Singaporean citizens to own share in the GLC. The late 2000 to 2010s, government wanted to make the market work better, so there was a period of heightened global and regional economic volatility. As you know, 1997 to 98, Asia economic and financial crisis, and the 9/11 terrorist attack. A new economic review committee was formed 2001, and they realized the need for Singapore to embrace the reality of globalization, tap the global networks and the markets, strengthen the local entrepreneurs and SMEs, and build knowledge innovation-based economy. So there was a shift, further shift towards greater private sector participation in government projects. And SME were very much encouraged and promoted. Throughout these many years of economic development, Singapore government has always viewed private sector, be it local or overseas, MNC in particular, as a key partner to work together to develop the Singapore economy. So basically, working with markets is a key determinant of success in Singapore's economic development. Government wanted to embrace the market thinking and encourage private sector participation in all the public sector development projects. There were two key aspects of working with markets. First, the engagement and partnership with private enterprise through public-private partnership, PPP. And second, harnessing the market forces through competitive pricing and bidding system to allocate and set prices for the scarce resources in Singapore. Indeed, on and after 2004, Ministry of Finance formally introduced PPP as a specialized mode of procurement for development project, government development project that exceeded 50 million and above. I was told through another source that it was introduced and implemented as a mandatory requirement. But lately, the last 2 years, Ministry of Finance relaxed it and make it no longer mandatory, but as a preferred rather than mandatory mode of procurement. And there is reason behind it. It's because public-private sector partnership, you look at it positively, there are lots of benefits to government because it maximizes value for money. Why? Because private sector generally is very profit-driven. Private sector's bottom line is the key. So they will think of ways and means, particularly innovation, to cut costs, maximize efficiency. It will also deepen and widen private sector capability. Last but not least, although never the government of Singapore's top priority because Singapore government is very rich, but it does, and it did, lessen some of the financial burden for big projects. The role expansion of private sector has changed quite significantly from simply financing, designing, or sourcing, building particular items of infrastructure through the tender process to also managing, operating, maintaining, and owning the assets. From multiple private sector handling different part of a infrastructure development project to integrated into one single service provider. And the size of the project and the risk-taking prospect has also changed significantly. What are the examples? I listed here, you can see that quite a lot were from PUB, desalination plant, new water, waste-to-energy plant, and Singapore Sports Hub, which was the biggest project by far, the biggest PPP project issued by Singapore government. But let's not forget, the government holds ultimate responsibility for ensuring the service quality and delivery, although the ownership of the PPP resided with the private sector. So in my view, the key determinant for a successful PPP, you have to align the interests, you have to complement your capabilities, you have to have efficient execution by the private sector, but very importantly, effective monitoring by the public. meaning by the government. Last but not least, very appropriate risk sharing. So private sector can only take that much of a risk. You need transparency, clarity. Public sector have to bear the regulatory and political risk. Only then can the PPP be successful. I will stop here. Thank you.
This is the present HDB. You can see my fingerprint. Okay, so in a way, before I left HDB, I was involved in this. This one is the past HDB. You can see my fingerprint and my footprint. The reason why I say that is the government will go after me because I was the then chief structural engineer. So HDB in the past, you probably, when you look at this, we almost did everything. From master planner, master developer, consultant, contractor, supplier, so on. We built towns, flats, amenities, land reclamation, construction resources, essential services. Now you look at the logo, just do it. It was invented by HDB. I try to simplify give you this picture to show you the stakeholder. So you look at the developer. We are the master developer. From the day HDB was formed, it is still a master developer. So this role, never give up, okay? You are running a government, don't give up. The next one is a consultant. Okay, we are the consultant all the while since now. Although we liberalize, I'll tell you why we are still the consultant. R&D, okay, is government's or is HDB responsibility. So the one we are involved all the while. Then I show contractor, or the dot sign, where it's the right time to come in, we come in. Where it's the right time to go out, we go out. Similarly as supplier. Okay, so you see the outcome, okay, from a squatter to HDB town and facilities. Now, we are not just only building town, we continue to upgrade, whether it's upgrading the flat or the lift, and then where the land has potential, we're going to do the SIRS, and then you see in the newer area, we now go into the living environment. HDB mission, okay, never change. We have corporate meeting. The 3 statements remain. Now, so if you are a businessman, I can tell you, it provides confidence for the business community. The next thing is, all the while, we have been transforming from a labor-intensive to a modern one, and then we nurture and retain and develop the stakeholder. Because if the stakeholder is not ready, continue to be there. But once you leave, make sure the system is there. And the last one is promote economic growth and jobs. So HDB, on the contractor part, okay, I mentioned to you, we transform labor-intensive to a modern industry. All the while, we are committed to upgrade the construction industry through advancement of construction technology, management of building resources, and the development of professional expertise and know-how. At one time, we even set up a company to show the contractor how to do it. So for a long while, actually HDB is a contractor, and all the contractors are subcontractors. Because basically, they just do this. Now, the next area, I showed to you, okay, this is what we do. Why are we doing it? Because we want to improve workers' productivity, we want to reduce the dependence of foreign workers, improve construction image, and improve construction quality. So, I mean, this graph shows us we do a lot of things. Today, BCA is a contractor, and all the contractors are subcontractors. They impose a lot of rules, how to build, so on. Now, resources is important. Why is it important? You must remember Singapore is a very poor country. We only can build with what we have. Right? So for example, say concreting material, granite, sand. We have to send out granite quarry, send out sand quarry. And for your information, 600,000 flat is built with Singapore granite. We only start to import lately. So either we do it within HDB, or we actually use the government link company, like RDC, to manage our quarries. So these are some pictures. Now, we also know that the contractors are very weak. right? And we cannot rely on workers with improved quality. So we even rent metal formwork. We rent all the formwork and we rent to the contractor, right? So this is to improve quality. The next one I'm going into is consultant. If you are just a consultant, I think it's not good enough. You just get a job and do. For us, we not only just to make sure that we are the consultant, we have to more or less evolve the design into something that's more, not just only safe, not just only nice. So we try to move to something that's more advanced. And so through this, we actually set out the prefab system, make it to a more buildable system. So in a way, we transform conventional building design to our own prefab system. Not only that, we must make sure that our design has a total quality control system from design, construction to maintenance. We have to pay attention to elevate quality, means strive for zero defect and minimum maintenance. So this is what we do. We even teach the contractor how to have a proper quality control system. So today, I must say our contractors are now building all the condo because HDB taught them how to build it. Now, next I go into R&D. So to me, R&D is actually very important. Okay, as an agency, we must look into this. So in the early years, we try to invest R&D to achieve excellence in design, construction, maintenance, so as to deliver a housing program. We invested very heavily in the R&D in concrete technology and prefab. Today, we move into something more sexy, which is sustainability. Right? So our R&D lab changed a little bit. Okay? We actually what we call a master lab. Master lab means to say at the R&D center, we get multidisciplinary people in, look at the idea or project, and then try to do it in the master lab. If it goes wrong, doesn't matter, just throw it away. Then we try to bring the living lab. Living lab means actual place we are building, right? And then we replicate. Now, same manner, we can actually bring it beyond Singapore. So we come up with this beautiful chart, and these are the areas we focus on. Now, just want to tell you that now the way we grow company is a little bit different from the past. Okay? We are no longer desperate to deliver flat. So, for example, in this green shoot we do, we become facilitator. Because HDB scale, we can combine everything and actually call a tender. So this is a local company called Sunseap. In the beginning, when we agreed together, they came in through the normal the bidding, and they are able to they got a job project. And as we go along, we actually think that it should not be just government paying the money. How about the private sector coming in money? Right? So come with a PPP model. And today, they are they are doing project which is probably able to provide energy for the whole of Toa Payoh town. The two projects they're doing now. So I come to my last point. Okay, my last point is, in case you got distracted by my slide, but I just want to summarize what I say. So the first point I'm trying to say, the stakeholder of the market must grow with us. Remember, the stakeholder of the market must grow with us. They are very important stakeholders. In the beginning, okay, let's say now you're a developing country. You have to build your capability, and we have to do the job. So if HDB is set out to provide housing, we have to do the job. Don't try to be very pure. We just got to do the job. And then be brave enough, set out vanguard entities, be game changer, go for something that's more quantum leap, add value stream, share the risk. And I think importantly is we must invest in R&D to ensure that engines serving us remain competitive and innovative. So the question for you to ponder, again, in case you don't know how to ask question, the big question is, why should government intervene? What are the pitfalls? What are the desired outcomes? And then some of you listen to me. You maybe want to call me hero or want to call me villains. So there must be a time to go in and a time to come out. Sometimes we stay too long and then you curse and swear at us. But when we look back, we say we did the right thing. But the only thing we stay too long. Thank you.
I'm going to be speaking on the topic of PPPs. And I'm sure you all recognize that photo there of Singapore's largest and most iconic PPP project, the Sports Hub. Well, where do we place the Sports Hub? PPPs the options are varied. They are found in sectors where the government needs either money or expertise, or both, okay? And wants to engage a private sector partner to be involved. So the Sports Hub is an example of a complex design, build, finance, operate concession, where the private sector participation is on the high side. There are simpler models such as management and maintenance contracts, operations and maintenance concessions. So the MRT lines, for example, come under operations and maintenance concessions. A PPP is a long-term contract. For the Sports Hub, it's 25 years. And it is a contract which specifies output performance outcomes over the project life cycle. So again, using the Sports Hub as an example, the Sports Hub cost $1.33 billion to build, no small amount. And the funds required came from about 15 parties, 4 equity providers plus 11 lenders. So just that process of getting all these people together, there is involves quite high transaction costs. So through a PPP, there's opportunity for more efficient allocation of risks, and risks that are better managed by the private sector can be transferred, and this will reduce costs and increase efficiency. Okay, as Ms. Lau has mentioned, if the risk allocation is inappropriate, it can cause a PPP to be either inefficient or become unsustainable. The private sector recovers the cost of the investment from future payment streams, which can be from the public sector partner, from the users, or a combination of the two. And therein also lies the risk for the private sector partner as to how the payment stream is structured and how it can adjust over time. Then as the length of the PPP can be many years, there's also a need for provisions to amend the terms or change the scope of the contract along the way. So lawyers therefore play a very important role, and legal fees for such contracts can be very high. PPPs are found in several infrastructure sectors, and here I have a list of the sectors that are important for urban development: ICT, power, solid waste disposal, etc. So the US has actually a very long history of relying on private sector provision for telecoms and power. AT&T's history dates back to the 19th century, and municipal as well as social services. Cities have engaged with the private sector for urban redevelopment projects, while some US ports and airports are operated through PPPs. G there stands for government. The US government stays out of the business of developing housing and commercial real estate generally, while public buses and urban rail are mostly operated by regional and local governments. The UK began the implementation of a massive privatization program in the 1980s under Margaret Thatcher. So the term PPP became popularly used only from 1997, when Tony Blair's Labour government was seeking a third way for infrastructure provision. The red dot there for UK urban rail denotes the failure of the urban tube PPPs. In Singapore, we moved to privatize the telecoms sector in the 1990s and the power sector in the 2000s. These privatization exercises followed models first used in the US, adapted by the UK and exported to other countries. These are actually regulated privatized sectors, not typically considered PPPs. There was a flurry of Singapore PPPs in the first half of 2000s, in waste disposal, the water sector, led by PUB. The project kickoff for Sports Hub happened only in 2004. Okay. However, Singapore's public sector has remained the dominant player in the port and airport sector, in urban redevelopment, in housing, industrial, and business park sectors. M there is for mixed government and private involvement. The previous 3 speakers have elaborated much on the deep expertise of the Singapore government in working with markets in these sectors. And this is an expertise which is not generally found elsewhere in other countries. So the limited number of PPPs, though, in Singapore has not been an obstacle for Singapore companies going global to be the private partner in projects overseas. There are numerous players in the ICT and power sectors, and the technology in these sectors moves very rapidly, and competition is very intense. So in the the Singapore companies are not that well represented overseas in these sectors. I've colored the port and airport sectors for Singapore companies going overseas. It's blue because this is a blue ocean space for PSA and Changi. PSA and Changi are everywhere. Okay, their overseas revenue now are a very substantial part of the company's revenue. They are corporatized companies. They are still 100% owned by the government. And these two companies expanded their global footprints. Their experiences actually show that there is no need for privatization of ownership. They are still 100% owned government companies, and they are the private partner in PPPs overseas. The same with GLCs involved in urban development projects globally. Suburban Jurong claims HDB's experience as its own. On its website, it says that it has planned 26 townships and it housed 80% of Singapore's population. So besides Suburban Jurong, we have other Temasek companies in the urban development space, Mapletree, Capital Land, Ascendus Singapore, Sembawang Corp. And these are all just literally all over the world. I move on to another sector, which is much more mixed in terms of results and PPP design. Okay, for urban rail PPPs, running rail operations, as we kept being told, are very complex tasks. Okay, so in this sector, I look to Hong Kong as an example of a very highly successful urban rail corporation. Okay, MTR was listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange in 2000, the same year the SMRT was listed. Okay, its share price has increased 5 times since. Okay, MTR is now in various cities such as London, Stockholm, Australia, Sydney, and cities in China. And but you must remember that Hong Kong MTR was structured very differently from Singapore's train operators. They were just operating and maintenance concessions. Okay, MTR is a super vertically integrated rail plus property company that builds rail infrastructure, operates trains, develops and manages real estate. So this very super integrated PPP design has enabled MTR to grow from operating a local metro network to become a global rail giant. So this quote is from the book, and that was made in the context of problems encountered by the Sports Hub PPP. The more services you put together that are coordinated under a PPP, the harder it becomes to identify a private sector partner able to deliver all the requirements. So this is true of all complex DBFO projects. Okay, there are trade-offs between integration, how much to bundle in one PPP, and the efficiencies and synergies that may be lost if you split them out into too many components. And when such efficiencies and synergies are lost, the difference in performance can be very significant. Okay? So integrated DBFO PPPs with multiple difficult to measure performance in the specs are a lot more complex than simple single output PPPs, such as, say, a power plant or desalination water project. So understandably, the risks and returns are correspondingly greater. So in this complex space, okay, if you can make it, as in Hong Kong MTR, the competition is less intense because the players there are much fewer. So Singapore's urban development companies, GLCs, I think they have done well because they are one of the few entities operating in this space where the experience of doing this engagement with market and how to help markets work better is not present in, say, US and UK. Deep experience is not there. So what are the broad principles that Singapore should adopt for its PPP strategy? Okay, the objectives for each PPP is not the same, but whatever the objective, it must be very clear. Okay, are you in it to get financing or for know-how, etc.? So domestically, the Singapore government has sufficient funds And there's less need for PPPs as a source of finance. In fact, when I was giving another PPP presentation, someone said that Singapore didn't need PPPs because PPP is a poor man's option. So I didn't quite agree, but there are good reasons why we might also want to pursue some local PPPs. One is for cost savings or value for money. Because in some sectors, economies of scale and expertise are lacking in Singapore. We're after all a small country and a medium-sized city. And the markets for some areas are much more developed in other countries. So foreign expertise and technology are needed. And such cost savings may not be easy to acquire by other means. Okay. A second reason for doing PPPs could be that there's an investment in learning from strategic partners in order to provide Singapore companies, including financial institutions, business consultancies, lawyers, accountants, with expertise and networks. And a third reason might be a bit more controversial. We look at the Sports Hub. It's an iconic project, right? It will help anchor Singapore's ambition to be Asia's infrastructure hub or infrastructure exchange. So it's like a kind of a showpiece for PPP involvement, okay? After all, it did win the Asia-Pacific PPP Deal of the Year in 2010, and more recently, the Global Asia-Pacific Best Refinancing Deal. So there are other plus of that particular project. So Singapore companies have leveraged on their domestic experience and competitive advantage in the areas where Singapore is well known for. Changi is the world's best airport. Singapore's port is one of the world's busiest. The HDB wins international awards for being the world's most successful integrated township developer. And JTC Mapletree have developed deep experience in logistics and running industrial parks. So these are the experience from which you can leverage to successfully enter into more complex infrastructure PPPs overseas as the private partner. So while opportunities for scaling up domestically is limited by our small size, PPPs and Asia's rapid urbanization allows for scaling up globally. So you see, this is the face of PPPs for Singapore. Perhaps it's not in Singapore that we are best known for PPPs, but you see Singapore townships, Vivo cities, business parks, reference cities, capital land malls, all appearing in cities across China, India, Southeast Asia. Okay, this is maybe the face of Singapore brand going global. Okay, in the form of PPPs, filling the infrastructure gap and contributing to sustainable urban development in Asia. Okay, these are complex, large PPPs. Potential returns are high. So are the uncertainty and risks. So I guess we need to tread with care. Thank you.
We've seen that play out in various areas our speakers have touched on, with resource development with land, allocating a very scarce and valuable resource in Singapore, various forms of economic partnerships with public housing, relationships between statutory boards and the economy, and private-public partnerships in general. So just want to pick up on Lau's example of the heroes and villains, which we all found very entertaining. Okay, so he mentioned, that government actually intervenes because it wants to be a hero, it wants to do good for the economy, to do good for the country. But sometimes when the government intervenes too much or intervenes too long, the government can be seen as a villain. So just picking up on that, just like to ask the panel, how does the government, or how should the government figure out when to intervene and when not to intervene? Maybe I'll ask Lau to sort of pick up on that, what he mentioned a bit earlier first, and then maybe any of the other panelists who want to chip in can also do so.
I don't see my enemies in the audience. So my enemies will call me villain. But I see some of my friends over there, they'll call me heroes. So let me just give you a very simple example. Because, on construction method, okay. So in the past, we used to build using timber formwork. Timber formwork will require skilled carpenter, right? So, so if you look at some of your older flats, you probably know the reason why it's not so straight. So we come up with this thing called the metal formwork, which is modular. It comes in modular pieces. You can assemble like Lego. So by moving to this modular thing, we de-skill the carpenter. We do not need this plasterer, so on. Right? So in the beginning, and we buy the form and we set a kind of price to rent the form from us. So in the beginning, the contractor, because they never seen such thing before, or the supplier never seen such thing before, they more or less employ this method. As time go by, they find that why not I instead of you buy the form, why not I supply the form? So we carry on for quite a long while because ultimately, because we look at it differently. We look at it because I have to deliver the building program. Every building program is a political commitment, okay? So I cannot allow some of these market forces to come in. Now, for this method form, looking back, I thought I probably run it for too long, and I became a villain. But in the beginning, I was a hero. And everybody say, wow, you really come up with something very good. So this is a simple example. I mean, there are many examples I've implemented. Some of them, I must say that in the beginning, we teach them, and after some time, they feel that actually you inject some market forces, they can be competitive, okay? So that was what I meant. Okay, maybe another one. Okay. So for example, say a consultant. For a long while, HDB never allowed any consultant to do the design, whether it's structural architecture, for a very long while. Right? So really long while. And to the consultant outside, my friend, I don't know whether he's around, SA, they think they are better architect. Why is HDB holding it? So they complain. So in this case, my chief architect, Tony Tan, is a villain.
I think HDB is a very unique example because I can't think of any other country in the world where more than 80% of the people live in a HDB flat. Therefore, government, when undertook this particular massive public housing program, have the economy of scale. But even then, over the years, it has to be, as a state, we have to retreat from the market and help to grow the private sectors. Otherwise, too much of a power will be concentrated on just one particular either authority or statutory board, which doesn't allow many flowers to flourish, many ideas to be groomed. HDB is a classic example. In the old days, we used to say that everywhere looked the same. You go to the town, you get lost because they all look the same. Then DBSS was introduced. You can see within a certain kind of framework, you do allow private architect to design things a little bit more interestingly. Anyway, leaving aside HDB, I would like to say that when government work with the market, we must recognize that both government and the market are not perfect. Therefore, we must be very candid and assess who are capable of doing what. I remember in the mid-1970s, there was this hit about privatization. Everything market can do better, government to withdraw. Even we talk about hospital, maybe we should privatize all the hospitals. The late Sim Kee-boon, who was a very senior perm sec, during one very closed-door discussion among the administrative officer, he stood up and he said, Singapore Statutory Board, many of them have done wonderful job to help building the Singapore economy. PSA, HDB, PUB, CAAS. So please, I urge all of you as a young and enthusiastic administrative officer, admin officer, don't always think that private sector can always do better than public sector. It all depends. And in Singapore, because our public sector, our government, luckily, is very upright, non-corrupted. Therefore, when they plan and execute, they can do things well. Now, having said that, some people ask me during some other lecture that, was it a mistake to privatize so many GLC? Would we have been better if all the GLC continue to be owned by government? I said, yes and no. Sometimes we make a little mistake. I must say that SMRT was a mistake because the formula just not sustainable. But other thing else, it was a successful story. DBS Land merged with Pidemco, formed CapitaLand. CapitaLand, therefore, have a strong foundation, home base. But with that, they venture overseas. Now CapitaLand is pretty successful in China, in Vietnam, and elsewhere. This is propelled our GLC and go overseas. I can also mention about Sembcorp, which was a merger of ST and Sembawang. You can talk about Kappa. We have all gone regional and even global. So the privatization of some GLC has actually spin off further and derive benefit for the country. However, certain things government should continue to do, and because they've been doing well. And we need not always follow other people's example. I would be very sad if we say that, oh, private sector can run better schools, so government school, please withdraw and let the private sector run the school. No. Singapore, private school are not necessarily better than public school. In fact, we all know the public school, the government school are much better. Why? Because educating our young generation is the responsibility of government. Public housing, especially you want to provide affordable housing, it has to be in the hand of government. Of course, you must be smart enough to work with the market so that certain things market do better, you let them do. If you can incentivize the private sector to set up factory just to provide you the tile that you need because you give them contract that's sustainable, they will do things and they do things efficiently. In fact, big developers do it that way also. They will give long-term contract to another business partner so that they can be focused and deliver the goods with quality and timely delivery to them. So public and private sector has to be very realistic about who can do what. If the interest is not aligned, private sector is profit maximization, and you give me a contract, I can earn more, I earn more, but I must deliver whatever you specify, whatever you expected. The public sector must bear in mind that you cannot have the cake and eat it. You cannot say that I privatize SMRT, then I don't have to bear the political burden of regulating the fare. You can't. The train fare is a political decision. If you want to make the train fare affordable, even to the extent of subsidizing it, you have to bear the responsibility. That's why I think the formula can't work, and therefore they now change the formula. That when I assign the contract to the private sector, like the water desalination, the waste to energy, the seawater desalination, the new water, why it works? Because you take that regulatory risk from the private sector. You told the private sector, you don't worry about how much I charge a citizen on the water tariff. That's my business. If I choose to subsidize the citizen, nothing to do with you. I am your take or pay single buyer. You deliver the water promptly with this kind of quantity per day, with this kind of water quality, and you tell me how much must I pay you. Then all of us private sector, we bid on the understanding. Very transparent. I don't have to worry about the water tariff up and down. That's your political decision. I just say, this is my production cost, this is my financing cost, this is my profit expectation, so I want to charge you X dollar per meter cube of the water. That's all. We compete on that transparent basis. It works. But if you come to a much more complex project where you expect the private sector to have all the capability, it's difficult.
One thing that I do want to pick up, and please indulge me on this, is really on this question of the private sector perspective. So we've been talking a lot about government and how government can work with the private sector. So if we flip that around, and there are also a lot of challenges of the private sector working with government. So sometimes it's not easy to work with the government as well from the perspective of a private firm. So how can governments address and reduce these challenges while still being impartial and still being objective? How can we make it easier for the private sector to work with us? Just because you've spoken a lot about sort of how government can engage the private sector more effectively, so how we can build systems and how sometimes we rely on the private sector for capabilities. But on the other hand, we've also interviewed a lot of private sector people for this book. And sometimes the feedback we get from the private sector people is that sometimes it's difficult to work with the government because the government might have different requirements or the government might have multiple regulations. So what's your perspective on some of that from a government point of view?
It's very important for the private sector to give feedback because the government may come up with various regulations and controls and so on from their perspective. I have talked to some private sector people before, and they can be unhappy about various things that the government is doing. For example, say the education industry, the private education industry. I have heard complaints from a lot of private education operators who say that Ministry of Education is really ridiculous in the way they certify and audit the companies for certification. And the kind of processes they make these firms go through, the cost of it, the time taken and so on is so overbearing that it probably will drag them down, you know. Then I always tell these people, why don't you give feedback to the officials in Ministry of Education who are doing this? Because from my point of view, someone just asked me, how long have I been in the government? I say 45 years. And throughout these 45 years, I have always been under the impression about myself and my colleagues that we always try to do our best for the government, for the people, in the work area that we work on. So to me, if Ministry of Education is being unreasonable and being difficult with the private school operators to the extent that they all are thinking of giving up, to me, if they give feedback, I'm sure Ministry of Education will respond in a responsible manner. But my friend said, no, if we were to give feedback and this and that, it will be marked down. And it's a matter of life and death for us, because if the officials mark us down, we don't get our certification, whether the 1 year or the 4 year certification, we are dead. We have invested so much. If we don't get certification, we just got to close straight away. Therefore, we dare not make the officials angry. So I still don't understand that and don't believe that, and I'm still encouraging these people to give feedback. But I don't know if they may be right. I can only speak for myself and my fellow colleagues whom I worked with for 45 years that we are always there to listen and always there to try to do our best. So I will encourage the private sector to always give feedback when you think things are not fair, not reasonable, not right, and then work together with the government officials to come up with the best solution to whatever problems there are.
First, I must tell you, when I was sharing just now, I was sharing based on the past HDB. So the formula we are adopting will change with time. Okay? So for example, now if we are going to apply the same formula in HDB, it probably doesn't work. I actually love the private sector. The private sector will bring in the money. The private sector will have a bit of discipline on the timing. So in mega project, I think we leave it to my friend, okay, don't mind I call him, Mr. Architect, Mr. Engineer. Then we design everything, then we try to procure it. We probably won't get the best. So for mega project, today we promote what we call early contractor involvement. Now, contractor will come, let's say the design is being done. Contractor, together with his design team, will probably come up with alternative design, value engineering, and try to make the project more efficient. Right? So this is one way to bring the private, now we have to work together, rather than just procure in a very traditional manner. Then the simple project which I've gone through is, remember the one on the solar, which is something new? Right? So government pay the money, so I try to aggregate. So instead of buying for, say, a project, I now buy for more project, because the cost will go down. Then I start to bring in, okay, why not you finance the project? And then all the energy you harvest, you make it. Right? So in a way, once you have some of these projects that become bankable, then the formula will change. Okay. But I must also say that it depends on what stage you are. So just now my sharing was sharing on HDB during the pioneering years. During the pioneering years, it's different. No? I have to get either my division run a quarry or get a government link company. We just got to do it. But we have to do it in such a way that we don't hollow up. Nobody can do it. We have to do it such that those people involved, the local fellow, will more or less grow with us. And we actually earmark that sooner or later we'll take over. So whether it's the PDEMCO land, so on, I think they are slowly built up. But when it comes to a point to let go, it's like a bird. Let go, don't hold too long.
Comments to the audience, please. Just two quick small requests. Please state your name and organization when asking comments or asking questions or giving comments. And also, let's keep our questions short and sharp. Please raise your hand. Our ushers will come around with the mics.
I'm Bruno Wildemut. I'm a retired consultant. Actually, I used to be primarily in transport planning, but I am very interested these days in other aspects of urban development, and increasingly we are emphasizing sustainability. There are 2 points that are interrelated that I'd like to point out. One, for instance, is HDB so far has failed to provide centralized air conditioning. Although you go to any HDB building, you see that every household has put in their own air conditioning installation. Now, everybody knows that centralized air conditioning uses about 1/3 of the power, of the energy, and is cheaper, definitely, for everybody in the long run, but it costs a little more initially. Similarly, quite related, you look at any office building in Singapore, they're all air-conditioned all day long, 24 hours. Do they have double glazing? No. Why not? A developer told me when I asked him, well, the benefits go to the end users. It costs me more as a developer. So these are 2 examples where, despite the private-government partnership, we have failed to move in the direction where we clearly need to move.
So thanks for those observations. Maybe I can just distill it. I think the first point is really on HDB and the role it should take in maybe specifying some of the building technologies or maybe for efficiency. The second point maybe in terms, because you're talking about private office buildings, so maybe in terms of the role of the state in regulating, maybe energy efficiency, use or double glazing for buildings perhaps. But any points that any of our panelists would like to address on those comments, regardless of what I just said?
In the old days, we couldn't and we wouldn't air condition a HDB flat because of the affordability. At that time, it's meant to provide affordable, that means cheap housing to all the citizens. Therefore, you can understand. And government have left it to the individual to say whether you are rich enough to want to make life more comfortable to you yourself. If you do, then you install your own air conditioning, right? Therefore, in the early year, you can see that only the 5-room flat and maybe the 4-room and definitely maybe the EC, then they all air condition their own room. But the 1-room, 2-room, very few air conditioned. But maybe you're right. Today, things are very different. Maybe affordability has rises a bit. And so almost everybody would like to have an aircon. It's a question of, I think the majority would like to have an aircon rather than minority. So the question is, why wouldn't HDB consider maybe providing the centralized aircon? If you buy private condominium, it's all centralized aircon, correct? It is also not. Right. So there must be more efficient way of solving this problem. What HDB did very well was, for example, centralize the gas delivery. So it was built from day one. So all HDB flats, in fact, you can buy gas directly without having to lay your own gas pipe.
So I mentioned to you, remember I began with the present slide, and I said I got fingerprint there. Then I show the past, and said I'm responsible. Okay, so this question, I'm responsible. So let me give you a bit, okay? In fact, I came here, I didn't want to wear a coat. But they said to look presentable, wear a coat. Now, so let me remind you, Singapore is in a tropic. So our design is always passive. Now, if you look at HDB, we are more or less designed in such a way that it's north-south, north-south. If you lose your bearing, look at our building, north-south. You walk north, you go to Woodland. You walk south, you come here. Right, so we design a building more or less cross ventilation. You notice your living room, your bedroom, your kitchen, you don't need aircon. Right? Because as the country progresses, they want to have aircon. Okay, so you look at HDB flat. Actually, they do put a split unit. But do they turn on or not? That's another question. Right? I can tell you, okay, because we have to record the HDB bill, the kind of energy bill. Actually, it's not very high. They only turn on when the weather is hot, like today, Right? So in a way, when you see the aircon, it doesn't mean that the whole building needs air conditioning. So the fundamental thing in sustainability is we must reduce energy. Right? Centralizing energy, okay, it's an engineering solution. Whether it's a likable solution, I really don't know. But I tell you, I got a flat in Trellis Tower. There was some centralized thing. After 10, 20 years, it broke down. I don't know who to find. So finally, I put a split aircon. So centralization has some other technical problems. So the point I'm trying to tell you is, our design is passive design. We design that cross ventilation. Of course, you want to put aircon by all means. You want to turn on aircon by all means, but you pay for it. Right? So most HDB flat, in terms of energy, they are quite, prudent in their use. The next thing is talk about glass. Whether you use double glazing or not, I think we should look at it as a whole. Okay? So for this area where BCA legislate, they have what you call this practical one, right? Where I think they put in some kind of e-glazing, which is probably alternative double glazing, right? So we don't stop designer from putting double glazing or not, but as long as they could cut down the energy, right? So I must say that by and large, the built environment, there's a strong arm from the government to make sure that the energy built today, is very efficient. The challenge is to go back to the older building, right? So the government has set a target that 80% of all the building will need to achieve some kind of green, some kind of level. So your point is relevant. In today's world, sustainability is important. We have those resources, especially in Singapore. There's nothing. There's this small piece of land, but the people are growing. So we really got to make sure that we use less energy, we to more or less reduce our waste, and then think of efficient way, to make sure that the livable environment is livable.
Speaking from the perspective of a Singapore citizen, I used to live in a private condominium, and when I purchased the apartment, the air conditioner came with the private condominium, and I have no chance to choose the brand of the air conditioning that I want. And it came with a brand called Yong, which most of us probably never heard of, and I was pretty angry about it, but I have no choice but to accept it. But now I'm living in a HDB flat, and if we're future HDB, they were all to be built with a central cooling system, I would feel that the government has overstepped too much into the private market, because they would deprive me of my choice of choosing exactly what I want. Maybe I don't even need air conditioning because HDB has built the house in such a way that if north-south aligns, so there's breeze inside. And I would also want to have the choice of choosing my own brand of air conditioning.
My name is Liang. I actually worked in overseas for quite a while, probably 10 over years. And I live in Shanghai and Bangkok. So I'm pretty well aware of what is going outside as a consultant, and also work with some global branded companies. So I thought outside, I see things doesn't work all the times, most of the times, even in places like China or Thailand. But I wonder why we feel so negative for what we have achieved so much, especially our housings, our land sales, our privatized efforts in many ways. I think we can consider ourselves something that everyone look forward to learn from us. I mean, today when we come together, I can sense a bit of pessimisms, a bit of negative sentiments of what we have done, which we're coming together to celebrate what we have achieved. So my question is that we should look forward what is ahead of us. I think the government is thinking more about the master developers, consolidations of certain consultants to make it more bigger players to compete in the international markets. And also cases like now with foreign players like the Chinese developer coming in a big ways to snatch our lands and things like that that compete very hard with our local developers. There's a lot of disruption out there. Competitions are getting a bit tougher for our consultants. So to leverage on market efforts, the government's probably got to play a very different role than before. I want to know from the panelists how we could strategize some kind of leveraging our own private consultants and industry players so that we can compete more effectively and we can make a better home for Singapore. Thank you.
Hello, I'm a visiting researcher at CLC, and my question was about when you all spoke about how the governmental sector can work better with the private sector and to make it easier for private developers. And I was wondering what you all thought about current incentives that the government puts out to developers, like GFA incentives to shape developments to fit with master plans and conceptual plans. And I was wondering if you think the current way that the public sector creates incentives is working, and if not, what would you suggest to modify it?
Okay, thank you. And a question on the current incentives for developers, whether these are adequate or whether these need to change. Any of our panelists, please feel free.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've not taken on that role of growing. You see, in the area of government land sales, the national objective of getting development done, getting Singapore developed so that we can improve the built environment in Singapore, so that we can attract investment, so that we can support the economy, and so on. Those were the pressing issues that we have faced over the last 50 years. Unfortunately, URA never took upon itself to, except for other areas, maybe development control and so on, but in the area of land sale, it had never been the objective of trying to grow the capability of consultants or developers to compete overseas. I suppose this is a byproduct, as Ms. Lau has said. The fact that CapitaLand had grown from Pidemco land into the world player that it is today is, I mean, government land sale definitely contributed to that, because with the land sale, they got into development, they honed their development skill, their design capability, and so on, and they were able to go overseas with experience in Singapore. But it was never our objective or mission to think of a way to get developers together so that they can grow. It's a byproduct, so to speak. So when you address it to me now, I don't really have a ready answer with respect to that.
I think the question about consultants and growing, strategizing to compete internationally, I think that is actually what Temasek is doing in terms of merging of Sabana consultancy with Jurong and the real estate companies in the Temasek stable of companies. So that enlarged entity is much more able to compete globally against big players internationally. So I see that as one strategic move in that direction. But should they be doing more of it? And what are the risks of entering such big projects in so many countries all over the world? That's something which, well, it's for Temasek to address. The other issue about GFA and master plan, I think Mr. Choy talked about GLCs, but in the GLC's land sales framework, the GFA is already incorporated. The government gets the benefit of the increase in GFA ratios from the land sales proceeds. I think the question may be in relation to the en bloc sales that are going on now, where there's an increase in the GFA from the master plan, and the benefit goes to a small group of private landowners, property owners in the area, who are able to reap the benefit of the change in planning parameter from the change in land density usage. So this creates incentives for all these en bloc sales that are going on now. So the issue is, well, in the past we used to do wipeouts of land gains from using the Land Acquisition Act. Now these land use planners are just with a change in density ratio or land use, giving this windfalls to lucky landowners. So that is an issue which I think the planners will have to.
Sorry, I missed that. now I know why everybody's looking at me. Now, this thing about increasing plot ratio and giving rise to this windfall through en bloc redevelopment. Okay, let me say that it was a once-off thing in the 90s. In the 90s, when they were doing what they call the development guide plans after the concept plan 1991, it was realized that really the plot ratio in a lot of areas in Singapore is just too low. And if we are going to have a growth in population, as we are seeing now, in fact, the growth in population that we have seen over the last 10 years far surpassed any imagination that we had in the 1990s. When we were doing the planning in the 1990s, we were not thinking of 5 million by 2010, but it happened. But even without knowing that, we were already knowing that we have to intensify the plot ratio so as to be able to accommodate not only the people, but accommodate the businesses and the factories and the schools. So we needed more built-up area to be able to accommodate all the activities that will come about with population growth and economic growth. So that's the reason for this up in plot ratio. So it was across the board, and many people benefited from it. Good luck to them. But it has to be done. It's done. Some people benefited, some did not. From now on, I don't think you'll be seeing this kind of plot ratio increase anymore. But nevertheless, we were discussing even before this session, despite the fact that there's no plot ratio increase, there is still scope for en bloc redevelopment because people are now willing to live in smaller flats. And when you go into smaller flats, per square meter price is higher. So the developers see this, and they are willing to buy a development and rebuild a development into smaller flats, and there's value to be gained. And if that is the case, again, this is a market. We cannot fight against it. We cannot be envious of the people who benefited from it. But in terms of government upping plot ratio, I'm no longer URA, like Engineer Lau is no longer HDB. I can't speak for URA, but to my understanding, it's not going to happen again.
So from what our speakers have said today, we can draw two main threads of working with the market. The first being working with private firms in the private sector. The second, as Ms. Loh said, also working with the price mechanism or using prices to allocate goods and services. I want to just share an observation by our Executive Director, Mr. Khoo Ting Chai. He can't be with us today, but we interviewed him. He said, as the government, we have to work with the market, but we can't oversimplify and leave everything to the market. Sometimes there's a temptation to say, there's a functioning market here, so I leave it to the market. Too often, leaving things to the market means I privatize everything, I call for tender for everything. But Mr. Khoo mentioned, it's not so simple, and it's not what our urban pioneers did. Working with the market means you have to go out there, understand and talk to firms, understand the market, persuade them to do what is necessary, and find ways to create successful outcomes for Singapore. So our four panelists have all focused on pragmatic, eclectic, and adaptive ways in which the government has worked with the market and has shared their experiences of the various ways in which they have done that through their various domains of expertise. So please join me in thanking all of them for a very good sharing session. Thank you.